Good afternoon. I'm so thrilled to be able to be joined by two of the stars of our movie Heist, Who Stole the American Dream. Both Robert Kuttner and David Cay Johnston were interviewed in the fall of 2008 following the stock market crash in this country. And here we are the day after the elections of November 2025 in year one of Trump presidency 2. And that we wanted to get their thoughts on what's happened since then, how they view Heist, the film, in terms of what it said then and how it predicted what's happening now. So I'd like to begin by asking Bob, would you please introduce yourself briefly? And then I'll ask David to do the same.
Yeah, I'm Bob Kuttner. I'm still the founding co-editor of the American Prospect and still a writer and an editor for the Prospect.
David.
I'm David Cay Johnston. I'm an author, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, and I'm now a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, where I teach criminal justice, journalism, law, and political science.
Well, there you go. That's a mouthful. So when we originally put Heist together, we viewed it through the lens of class warfare. And now, 17 years later, after these interviews took place, we have a somewhat different view. We now see not only was it class warfare, but it's race and class warfare right now. And so we view this now as the new old civil war in this country. And we'd like to get both of your thoughts on that to start with. David, you want to start?
Go ahead.
Oh, Bob started.
Okay.
Well, I would say, and it chagrins me to say, that everything that had been set in motion in 2008 has continued to go downhill. And there were two huge missed opportunities. Missed opportunity number one was, of course, Barack Obama. Obama had an opportunity to be Roosevelt too, because history handed Obama a great crash caused by the predations of capitalism. And and he had 70 Democratic senators, and he had a mandate to really shake things up. And instead of doing that, he hired the same economic team that had brought us to deregulation, that brought us to collapse. These were all clones of Robert Rubin. And so you knew from the day that he hired that team that things were not going to go well. And so instead of a clean out, we got a bailout. And instead of helping homeowners who'd been pillaged by subprime, he ended up rescuing the banks. And by not taking the so-called Great Recession seriously enough, he presided over a very slow recovery. He tried to put the country on the path to deficit reduction before the recession was over, and foamed the runway for Donald Trump. The second missed opportunity was when Elizabeth Warren ran against Bernie Sanders for the Democratic nomination, and they crowded each other out. One of them could have been the nominee, and all of that anger could have gone left instead of going right. And so Trump used ethno-nationalism and racism to capture the very legitimate anger that working class people felt. And when Biden came in with a slightly watered down, but not too bad version of the Warren-Sanders agenda, it was an out-of-body experience because you had, the program of Elizabeth Warren in the persona of Joe Biden, and it just didn't track. He was the wrong messenger. So we had two missed opportunities. We had the same patterns of deregulation, privatization, tax cuts for the rich, jobs going down the drain because of a laissez-faire neoliberal approach to trade, and the right, rather than the left, capturing the indignation. So all of the patterns that you and we described in Heist have been intensified. And the only good news is that Trump is a complete phony. And as we saw on election day, the voters perceive this. The Republicans may have some second thoughts about who they're getting into bed with, and maybe we can see the beginning of a turnaround before this country turns into a complete dictatorship.
David,
I very much agree with Bob. Some minor points I might disagree with, but I think he's described the problem very well. In 2023, the median wage in America, half of the people made more and half made less, was a tad over $800 a week. That's not very much money. And it's essentially the same amount of money people were making 50 years earlier. We've had a 50-year period now in which all of the gains have been going to those at the top. And we have seen individuals' incomes, or wealth rather, grow in a single day by tens of billions of dollars. We now have 100 or centabillionaires, not centimillionaires, centabillionaires, and we're likely to have the first trillionaire, something I wrote about in the New York Times back in the 1990s, in a few years, just about when I had predicted it would happen. Bill Gates came out the other day and said that if we had a proper tax system, my fortune would only be 1/3 the size that it is. And he would still have vastly more money than he could ever spend. And so we got a couple of Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton, followed by Barack Obama, who I kind of look at as Republican light. They were Democrats in terms of social causes and dealing with racism and opportunity, but on tax policy and business regulation, they were just a softer version of republicanism. And Americans continue to be sold this nonsense that we need to deregulate. And I point out, and I teach this to my law students, there's no such thing as deregulation. Everything is regulated. I point out to my students on our campus, dating is regulated. You come to go to school, you sign a contract that regulates dating. We call it sexual harassment. And so what we've gotten is regulation of, by, and for the plutocrats. We've replaced consumer protection. The courts have been taking away from people the ability to go to court if they have a grievance. And I'm not arguing for litigation. I hate litigation. But if you've got something that needs to be addressed, you should have access to the courts. We've had a number of court decisions I've written about where courts have ignored the Constitution, they have ignored the law, and they've done what's convenient for the judges because, among other things, we don't have enough federal judges in this country, as John Glover Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, keeps telling us. So what was in Heist has held up very, very well. Nothing has fundamentally changed, and many things have gotten worse. And by some, and I emphasize that word, by some economic measures, the economic collapse in 2007, 8, 9 was worse than the Great Depression, particularly for young families who have not recovered. And combined with that was this artificially inflating the value of houses. So when I was 22 years old, I was able to buy a house with my own money as a newspaper reporter. That house today is worth $3 million. It's just a tract home, a stucco slab tract home. And all across the country, we have priced large numbers of people out of things that almost 50 million people depend on food assistance through SNAP, the old food stamps program, and WIC, the program for pregnant women and toddlers, screams about something is fundamentally wrong in our society. We didn't have food banks until 51 years ago, and they keep growing and growing. And it's because there's a systematic effort, bipartisan to some degree, but mostly Republican, to push down wages and to lift the wealth and income and lower the taxes of people who have far more than they can ever consume.
John, if I may, you mentioned race. I want to turn the conversation for a moment to race. The New Deal was a New Deal for white people. It was a New Deal for white people because that's what it took to get it through the Dixiecratic Congress. And Roosevelt knew that he was making a terrible bargain. And later in his term, after A. Philip Randolph threatened to march on Washington, Roosevelt did issue an executive order requiring that blacks be allowed to take jobs in defense plants. And then Truman integrated the armed forces. This is the era of Jackie Robinson getting into the majors. And very, very slowly, the Democratic Party came around to redeeming the promise of Lincoln, of course, pushed and prodded by the civil rights movement. But this was always going to be a heavy lift. And the more the white working class was screwed economically, the heavier a lift it was going to be. If we had had decent jobs to go around, if we hadn't had offshoring and outsourcing and neoliberal trade policies, maybe there would have been more receptivity on the part of white working class people to allow America to get beyond its racist history. And in some of the better unions, like the UAW in that era, you saw real integration on the shop floor as well as among union elected officials. But if you take decent jobs away from white working class people and you tell them they're privileged and you tell them they have to learn a weird woke vocabulary, you're just going to set off an explosion, and black people are going to be scapegoated. And of course, Trump feeds on that. And so I think some of our cultural left friends have poured oil on the flames by doing all of this performative stuff around vocabulary and pronouns. And that's, as the Protestant theologians like to call it, that's cheap grace. Sloganeering and performative use of language doesn't change anything in the real world. Real change is very hard. But because neoliberals, Democrats as well as Republicans, sold out the working class of all races, then you have working class people of different races being angry at each other. And that's what the far right feeds on. And just to come back to the financial collapse was set off by the deregulation of finance that allowed subprime. And subprime mortgages were targeted at black homeowners. The black home ownership rate, as a result of the subprime scandal, is lower today than it was 50 years ago after the enactment of the Housing Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So when you screw the working class of all races, you just set up a politics that allows the right to play race off against race, and that's what's happened. And then, of course, you have immigrants. You add that to the stew, you scapegoat immigrants, and then, it's like, let you and him fight. And meanwhile, I'm laughing all the way to the bank.
And Don, if I could add a little bit to Bob's really excellent points here. By the way, among black homeowners, the numbers of them reduced as a share. Many of them qualified for solid conventional 15 or 30-year mortgages, but they were steered into these products because the salespeople got huge commissions for selling these horrible mortgages. And that's one of the areas in which things are worse than they were in the Great Depression in terms of home ownership. There's one area of this country that race is absolutely central to why we can't save well over $1 trillion a year and make our economy more efficient and make lives better. If we had the French healthcare system, which study after study shows is the best in the world, or the German system, which is different and almost as good and costs the same amount of money, we would save over 6% of GDP. Now, folks listening to this, that doesn't mean anything to you, does it? I mean, Bob and I work with these numbers all the time. They don't really mean anything to us either. Let me give meaning to that. All else being equal, as the economists like to say, if we reduced our spending on healthcare to where the French spend, we would have universal health care. Everybody who needed care would get it. You get injured on the job, instead of turning you from a taxpayer into a tax eater because we won't pay to properly fix your hand, the machine mangled, and you have to now be on disability. We wouldn't have people losing their homes over health care bills. We wouldn't have people dying because they didn't get care until the last moment. It's the equivalent of no income tax for everyone who makes less than $600,000 a year. Now, in the real world, there would be other costs. their clerks, the ones who are busy being paid to say no to paying your medical insurance claim. They're all going to be out of work. But imagine if we were only able to raise the amount of income before you paid income tax from the current level of about $30,000 for a married couple. We could raise it to somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000. And the economics of people would be dramatically better. And if we had kept the income distribution of this country in 1973, the peak year for the 90%, the Rand Corporation, the think tank started by the Air Force and funded with military money, so it's not some woke organization. The Rand Corporation says that today, the bottom 90% of Americans would have 2/3 larger income. So if you made $50,000, you'd now have an income in the $80,000. If you made 100, you'd have 167,000, and all sorts of problems in this country would go away. All sorts of pathologies would go away. But we won't do it, and we won't do it for the very reason that one of my editors, when I was a reporter at the New York Times, said to me one day when I proposed a project about all the financial benefits of universal health care. And he said, we're never going to do that. And I said, well, no, because we're not writing about it. We need to tell people. He said, no. There's something you can't do anything about. And I had to press him until he finally said, David, you just compared our situation to Sweden. Everybody's the same race in Sweden. And he's actually right about that. Race is such an expensive thing. It costs a lot of money to discriminate against people based on the color of their skin, the vowels they use in language, or their religious beliefs. It's incredibly expensive.
And by the way, if we had the income distribution that we had in 1973, Social Security would be solvent forever because Social Security is funded by payroll taxes.
Right.
And when wages are suppressed, the Social Security trust funds don't take in enough payroll tax. So,
yeah, in fact, Bob, I've taken that and run the numbers on this. If we had simply kept Ronald Reagan's policy, which we talk about in the movie, and I think is a terrible policy, but if we had just kept his policy that 90% of wages should be subject to the Social Security tax, its financing would be fine. We're only getting about 80%. And why aren't we taxing all wages? We have people in this country who year after year, their annual pay is over $100 million. There's only a few hundred of them, but you pay 100% Medicare tax on your income. Why don't we lift Social Security? If we did that, we could raise the minimum benefit to the equal of the minimum wage, and we could vastly improve the poor older people in America's situation, and we'd have plenty of money for forever.
David
Okay,
and John,
I want to jump in here.
no, I got one more.
Go ahead, Bob.
Let me switch the subject to politics.
Well, I was going to do that.
Oh, good. Well, I've done it for you.
Good for you, Don.
So,
No. I want to introduce the Powell memo. Okay,
No.
everybody is talking
Well.
about the Powell memo these days, and guess who first brought the Powell memo to the public's attention? It was our film. It's the spine of our film.
Some people knew about it before then, but yeah,
Yeah.
it became much more widely known after your film. I
Right.
agree with you about that.
Yeah, I mean, but when you analyze the Powell memo, it lays out the whole scheme that you have both been describing here. So I wanted to ask you, did you both know about the Powell memo when we interviewed you in 2008?
oh, I think we both did, but we're a certain kind of
Yes.
journalist who lives, eats, and breathes this stuff. But let me
ahead.
just put the Powell memo in context. So I've got a memoir coming out, and my favorite chapter in the memoir is titled Winning the Arguments, Losing the Politics. And I would say between David and me, going back, how many years, David? 50?
My case, 60 years I've been at this.
Yeah, we have, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here. I'll pat you on the back. You and I have been right in our diagnosis of just about everything.
Yep.
And yet, the power of ideas is pretty feeble compared to the power of power and the power of wealth. So, and this is a great documentary. And in the years since this documentary, Heist, was produced, things have only gotten worse. Okay? So my question is, if we are so smart If we have been so accurate in our description of what is screwing the economy for regular people, and there are more regular people than there are plutocrats, if we keep winning the arguments, why do we keep losing the politics?
Well, let me take a cut at that, Bob, because I think you're right about that. I sometimes have a mental image of what I'm trying to do about this or that policy, and what I see is I'm holding my hand up to stop a tsunami. Ridiculous. It's coming. There's nothing you can do to stop it. We have deeply embedded cultural values, and it's really hard to get over them. I mean, why is there so much anti-unionism in America, even among Catholics, when Pope Francis said, without unions, there is no economic justice. There can't be economic justice. Well, people who couldn't get into the guilds in Europe, which were the prototypes to unions, they would leave and come here if they were ambitious. And so that your great-great-great-grandparents, who you don't even know who their names are, hated unions has filtered down throughout our society. We have elected again and again leaders who promise us a cheap and easy. Instead of, yeah, you want to have a better life, it's hard work, and suck it up, you got to do that. Donald Trump, and I've covered Donald longer than any other journalist in America. I've written 3 books about him, 2 of them bestsellers. Donald Trump understands how to appeal to people on a visceral level. At every rally, I love you. We love you. We love the poorly educated. I alone can save you. And those are appealing messages to people who do not understand what is happening to them, don't live like the 3 of us do in our heads. And the Democrats, when they run people against them, Hillary Clinton, Hakeem Jeffries right now, as I think the de facto leader of the Democratic Party, what do? They say, I have a 47-point plan. And if you'll turn to page 11 on footnote 3, and they just turn people off, even though when you read the plan, you go, hey, that's pretty smart stuff. A lot of this is understanding how to communicate to people, how to viscerally communicate. The term death tax, there's no death tax in America. There is a tax on your assets when you die because they're transferred. It's a transfer tax. And we could and should reform it, but how appealing. I mean, I've literally talked to many people who believe that when you die, the IRS comes and they take half of what you have. Never mind that the exemption for a married couple is over $26 million in assets. And if you got a good lawyer, you can move easily 10 times that without paying any tax. So there's a communication issue that's not us. It's the people who are the practical workers on it, the politicians. And on the side of the Democrats, they don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to communicate.
Well,
I want to jump in for a moment, being a community psychiatrist, because I've spent a lot of time on that. And David, you're touching on it, but it goes at one level deeper. And that has to do with the Republicans have figured out how to emotionally manipulate. They are tapping into people's fears and rage and anger, and they become quite expert at it, thanks to Frank Luntz and the guy who started Fox News. The Democrats, even though they've been told over and over by experts such as George Lakoff, who wrote Don't Think of an Elephant in 2004, that you have to learn how to emotionally message.
Yep.
And the Democrats refuse to do that. Now,
I don't know if they refused on, but they
do.
They're incapable so far of doing it. And it's not that you're right. They haven't been told. The Republicans also do some appeal to you'll be better off. And they're still out there selling the idea that, you, Mr. Taxi Driver, will become a millionaire. Well, a couple of them will, but 99.99% of them won't.
Right. Bob, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to take slight exception to some of this just to make it interesting. I think people are too quick to talk about the Democrats. So, AOC is a Democrat. Zoran Mamdani is a Democrat. It's not as if you can generalize that much. There are a lot of stupid Democrats. There are a lot of Democrats who were cowards, like Chuck Schumer. There are a lot of Democrats who are on the take. But that doesn't prevent a Democrat who has a different view and a different way of communicating, like Mamdani, from realizing what's really on people's minds, which is that you can't afford to live, and turning that into a politics. So I think you need more of the Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Zoran Mamdani kind of Democrat. Um, and yeah, it's true that the Republicans are better at messaging, but I think two other, uh, well, one other M word, money. The filthy rich have so goddamn much money that they can corrupt both parties. And given that the Republicans have the same ideology as the very rich, and the Democrats allegedly are for the common person, the corruption of big money whipsaws the Democrats in a way that it doesn't whipsaw the Republicans. That's thing one. And I think thing two, Republicans are just clear about their ideology, whereas different wings of the Democratic Party have different ideologies, and that muddles the message. So it's rather hard to be good at messaging when you don't know what the hell you believe.
Okay, so hold on. You just led me into the next series of questions, which has to do with the money and the families who had the money and funded, for example, the Heritage Foundation, which came out with the early version of the plan for President Reagan, right? And then came out with Project 2025. So I want to throw three questions at you at once. How did the six families that funded Heritage make out over the past 50 years?
They're richer and richer. That's just
Okay.
that's easy. They're richer and richer and richer.
Okay. Question number two, can you talk a little bit about the Heritage Foundation and the offshoots like the Federalist Society, ALEC, Moms for Liberty, and their impact, and how working people could combat their highly effective efforts? Question three, can you talk about the enablers that are implementing the worst elements of this right-wing agenda, like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Robert Vogt, etc., Mike Johnson?
So first off, let me just say that I agree with Bob, and I was too broad in my statement. I should have said the establishment leadership of the party in terms of communication, because people like AOC actually communicate very well, and Mamdani is masterful at it, and I won't be surprised if he rises to another office above mayor of New York, provided he can implement what he says are his policies. The people who read the Powell memo when it was circulated in the late 60s and who then started Heritage, Cato, the whole 12 big organizations, they have been serious about what they're doing. They have stuck to their knitting. They have learned through focus groups run by Frank Luntz, the pollster, and others, how to get across the points they want so that what would be horrible for most people in America sounds like it would be good for you when it's not. And the Democrats just haven't been successful at reaching people on that kind of visceral level. So you have to respect the people who are at Heritage and elsewhere. They come up with cockamamie stuff. They did an economic model to try and argue about tax policy. And we have a couple of other economic models that consistently turn out to be reliable. The one that Bill Beach did for Heritage just produced the craziest numbers that we all just laughed at it. And they finally shut, as far as I know, they shut it down. I haven't seen it publicly mentioned in years. But they stick to their knitting. And it's really important that we understand and appreciate that. They're selling bills of goods that they keep refining and polishing and making people think are good things for them when they're bad things. And until we figure out how to have a marketing approach to politics, a lot of people are going to not be interested. My late brother, who was a manual laborer, he dug ditches and graveyards, and was the guy holding up the sign that says slow down or stop at a construction project on the road, said to me once, I asked him why so many of his neighbors had signs for John McCain when they were all poor people like him. And he said, well, if I hated gays, loved guns, or believed in God, I'd be a Republican too, because what the hell have the Democrats done for me in my lifetime except give in and give in and give in to the rapacious demands of the Republicans and their billionaire payroll masters? And you know what? I think my brother had a pretty good insight.
Okay,
Also,
go ahead, Bob.
I think Heritage, Cato, AEI, and company have been more strategic than the Democratic philanthropist counterparts who are all over the place chasing the latest flavor of the day. Uh, they have the you know, Democratic billionaires are anomalous by definition. And I'll tell you a story on George Soros. When we were trying like hell to put some spine into the what became the Dodd-Frank Act, and there was a little tiny progressive lobbying group that was completely outgunned by the Wall Street guys. One of Soros's former close colleagues and I went to pay a call at him and said, you really need to put some money into Americans for Financial Reform because this legislation on the Hill is getting gutted. And Soros listened to us for about 45 minutes. And then he said, well, I have to tell you, I am conflicted here, but I will say one thing. If anyone is going to fight Wall Street with my money, it's going to be me. So you have the guy who is the principal philanthropist of progressive causes, who's also a hedge fund robber baron. And that's a contradiction. And guys at the Ford Foundation, women at the Ford Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and the other nominally liberal big foundations are looking over their shoulders at the board members, the trustees of that foundation, who tend to be more conservative than the president, and the president tends to be more conservative than the program officers. So you've got a disconnect in progressive policy mongering, progressive philanthropy of the sort that you don't have on the Republican side, where everything is in lockstep. The political goals, the ideological goals, the plutocratic goals are all in sync with each other.
Thank you both. Those are very important points to help our audience understand why we continue to see the Democratic Party not being a real party of opposition at the moment and presenting a real alternative to right-wing agendas of the last 40 years. I want to switch to a couple of other topics before you guys have to go, because you're always on the go. So one topic we really haven't discussed yet, since the rise of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh, etc., and since we released Heist, we have a whole new phenomenon called social media platforms, which are clearly much more pernicious than what we had before. So I want to get your thoughts about that. And I want to get your thoughts about AI. And I want to get your thoughts about cryptocurrency. So I'm putting them all together because these are all relatively new phenomena and they are ominous from our viewpoint.
Well, they have one thing in common, and they debase dialogue. They reduce dialogue to sloganeering, to sound bites. I want to recommend two books. They're the best two books that I've read on the subject. This is amazing. Cory Doctorow in Shitification. Where is it? It's blurry. It's blurry
Just hold
out
it
the word
steady.
shit.
Hold it
Hold
steady.
it steady and a little bit back.
Yeah.
Oh, can't do it. It's not. It's refusing.
Yep.
Huh. Okay. And the other one
There it is.
is
There it is. The book is called Enshittification, and it talks about the dynamics of platform monopolies and how platform monopolies start out by helping the user and then screw the user to help out the business customer and then screw both the business customer and the user and turn everything into a pile of shit. And the other terrific book is Tim Wu's brand new book, The Age of Extraction. And you read these two together, um, you get some understanding of why the combination of platform monopolies and social media has debased serious dialogue, serious news gathering, serious conversation about public issues. And AI only makes it worse. AI is the whole shebang on steroids.
So picking up on Bob's points, the rise of social media has been accompanied by the disappearance, the fastest disappearance of any white-collar job in America, journalists.
Journalist.
My local newspaper in Rochester, New York, when I moved here in 1993, had 226 journalists. It now has less than 22.
Oh, God.
The New York Times, the only exception, the newsroom is about 300 people bigger than when I left there. It's about 1,600 people now. It is the sole exception. And as we have all of these blogs and vlogs and citizen journalism things, all sorts of people who don't know how to check a fact, the most basic, simple fact, they just regurgitate lies and talking points. And AI, remember, AI is new. We're in the Model T Ford stage of AI to manipulate people. What happens when we get to the Tesla semi-self-driving version of AI? This is something we need to be very, very worried about. I'm not arguing against technological advances, just that we need to control them. And at the core of Heist is capitalism doesn't work if it doesn't have rules and controls on it, because it's an amoral system. You have to impose a morality upon it, or else it becomes utterly rapacious. And so I have probably a less critical view of capitalism than Bob does. I see it as the best idea we've come up with so far to improve human beings' economic conditions, but you got to control it, and you have to have competition. What we have seen in this country is this narrowing. You know, we went from 37 class 1 railroads, now we're down to 5, and it's really 4.5. We went from 50 big media companies down to 5 today. This concentration of ownership is not good for anyone. In the long run, it's not even good for the owners who are imposing deadweight losses economically on the rest of us. We need to have competitive markets. We need to have limits on corporations. We need to have shock absorbers to insulate ordinary people from the circumstances they have no control over from the outside. What the sociologists and people like that like to call endogenous forces, economists call it outside forces. And we're not doing any of that. We are reinforcing increasingly, oh, here's the super rich. How do we make them super richer and less accountable? And down that road leads poverty for the vast majority and maybe violent revolution. And I don't want either one of those.
Well, David, I
So-
agree with you about capitalism with one exception. We both agree that capitalism can be a very dynamic system if we can manage to housebreak it. But there's a feedback loop. The capitalists don't want to be housebroken.
Right.
And so there's a politics that makes it very difficult to harness capitalism in a good way. And it takes a very unusual conjuncture of circumstances, as in the case of Roosevelt. There's a wonderful history called The Great Exception on how Roosevelt was the great exception. Most of the time, capitalists succeed in getting rid of the harness.
Yeah. Bob, I agree with you about that. And I would just go back to one other thing. We will not be able to fix any of this until we recognize that the post-Watergate campaign finance reforms, which I covered heavily as a journalist.
Yeah.
I was with the Detroit Free Press then in Lansing, and we passed in Michigan the toughest campaign finance law in the country. Everybody agreed about that because my bureau chief and I just covered every detail of everything about it. So the politicians were scared to death to not be tough. The problem is it's totally backfired. The influence of the biggest donors and the ability of the biggest donors to hide the money that they're putting out there, not just in contributions, but all the other ways that wealthy people can use their pocket change to influence policy, it's completely blown up on us. And we have a Supreme Court that says dollars are free speech. That's a democracy killer right there. So we need to recognize there are some fundamental structural reforms. We need real campaign finance reform, which I would argue is you get a budget to run for office, and that way we get to see how you spend it. Secondly, we got to get unions back because ordinary people don't have the time or the knowledge to go do all the work to know what's good for them. That's what unions did for them. We need to get back, if not the religious social justice movement, some kind of new, reasonably funded social justice movements that do the same thing. And we need to have court rules that don't close the door on people and don't say, as one of the Supreme Court justices suggested today, Amy Coney Barrett, oh, undoing these illegal tariffs would be so complicated. I don't know if we could do that. We need to have judges who say, if it's wrong, we're going to fix it. There are other things as well, but we need fundamental back to basics and having competitive markets, representation for people, shock absorbers, and a whole bunch of other things. We can do that, but that doesn't mean we will do that.
Bob, what's your short list? And then I need to double back to Donald Trump and cryptocurrency, and then we'll let you out.
Well, my short list, and again, I want to bring this back to politics because anybody can make a laundry list of reforms. I think David has done that in the course of these conversations very, very, very well. I think you got to win the politics, and you need more people with the gift that Mamdani has of understanding what's on people's mind, reaching people with themes that resonate, being a really gifted political leader, and getting elected, and then getting into office and making change. And if you have progressives demonstrate that change is possible, then other politicians start following that banner. I mean, making a list of reforms is the easy part. If someone made David and me dictator, we could fix this country in 10 minutes, but that's not how it works. You got to win the politics.
Okay, David, tell us about Donald Trump and cryptocurrency
Well,
in a few minutes.
One of the phenomena in this country that's astonishing is people are spending huge amounts of real money to buy fake money. And that's what crypto is. And at the end of the day, because it's not a real currency, it'll collapse. I mean, already we know that there are large numbers of people who've lost their shirts because they bought high and they have had to sell low.
And that's what we're concerned about, that a
Yeah,
lot of young people have gotten into cryptocurrency not knowing what they were doing.
And a lot of billionaires, it's always the insiders who make the money and the suckers lose.
Right.
And crypto is just a more metastasized version of that story.
And we have a president, who I first wrote about it becoming president in 1988. We have a president who is a career criminal. He's the third generation head of a 4-generation white collar crime family. We have a number of white collar crime families in America, but law enforcement is focused on street crime, not the white collar crime that costs 20 times as much money to society. And he is selling pardons and clemency. He is making deals where his family and cronies are getting money from people. He sold this stable coin nonsense that made him a fortune. And this is all part of a grift that is an absolute violation of the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear. The president may not receive any emolument other than his salary, except with the permission of Congress. But in the first term, when citizens sued, a judge said, you have no standing. What, you're not harmed? Nothing you can do about it. So state attorneys general sued. And what did the court say? Well, you're not harmed by this. You have no standing, and dismissed their cases. The crypto business is going to hurt us and hurt us badly. It's already caused some damage to us. And the notion that people have that Bitcoin is a safe investment and the US dollar is trash is widening in this country, even though it is utterly and completely ridiculous.
Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball at both of you. This will be the last question. Is it possible to create a new political party, or do people have to transform the Democratic Party, or some mishmash of both?
You know, the way the Constitution is written, it's almost impossible to create a third party. I think the Working Families Party is very interesting because it's taken advantage of fusion states, and it's branching out with its brand into other states where you can get the working families endorsement, even though you can't get fusion on the ballot. But no, I think it's much more promising to take over the Democratic Party.
I'm with Bob about that. The third party movements have never worked. The framers of the Constitution and the founders, who are not the same people of the country, they didn't want political parties, but that's what we've got. And I think you have to work on getting the Republicans to go back to their stated principles. We're basically for business and creating wealth and minimizing the size of government and low taxes instead of what they're doing now. And we need to get the Democrats to again become the party of working people, not capital. And that is an internal measure. And as Democrats look at the success of people like Mamdani, of AOC, they, I think, will start to recognize that you want to win votes, you got to have something for people. And we can change the Democratic Party just as the Republicans changed their party when they decided to become the party of racism, hatred, bigotry, and you will think the way we say or else.
On that upbeat note, I really want to thank both of you so much. It's so great to see you both again. And of course, you haven't missed a beat.